Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. A few minutes ago, I was on Facebook and I came across a few articles about former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. He was on Face the Nation on CBS and he did an interview about police brutality, about Black Lives Matter, and about other related issues such as the shooting in Dallas, the shooting in Louisiana, and the shooting in Minnesota. So I just want to take some time to talk about what he said and then provide my response. One of the things that he kept talking about is black on black violence, so called black on black violence. He talked about how only 1% of African Americans die at the hands of the police. And he says 90% of African Americans are killed by civilians and most often at the hands of another black person. He talked about how every 14 hours somebody black is killed in Chicago. And he said that you never hear from Black Lives Matter when those types of incidents of so called black on black violence occur. And then he went on to talk about how African Americans need to teach their children to be respectful of the police. Um, he also talked about how black people need to teach their children to be careful of other black kids in the neighborhood. He went on to talk about how in Chicago uh, there were like 60 shootings during the 4th of July weekend and 14 murders during that time. And he said Black Lives Matter was nowhere to be found. And he says that Black Lives Matter doesn't focus on just black lives. He talked about how they only are concerned about black lives that are killed by white police officers. And he's not, that the organization is not concerned about black lives or black people killing each other. He also talked about how Black Lives Matter says chants that encourage violence against police officers. So he blames Black Lives Matter for basically putting a target on police officers. And he went on to say that just the idea of Black Lives Matter is inherently racist and anti-American. So I want to take some time to just break down some of the things that he said. I want to start with the last point that I raised, and that's that this idea that Black Lives Matter is inherently racist. He said all lives matter, uh, white lives matter, police lives matter. So why are people saying Black Lives Matter? He's saying that is racist. It's somehow separating black lives from other lives. And this is my basic response to that. The only reason why people even have to say Black Lives Matter is because the larger society doesn't value black lives. They don't see our lives as important. When a black person is killed by police officers, the media and the law enforcement community, the legal community, the criminal justice system, they try to rationalize the killing of a black person. They try to justify it. They tried to come up with all kinds of excuses to say that no crime was committed. They drag their feet when black people are killed by police officers. They take forever to complete their investigation. And often they conclude that there is no need for an indictment, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, whether that evidence is video evidence, whether that evidence is eyewitnesses. They don't care. They come up with a reason to rationalize it. And you have people like Giuliani explaining away the killings of people, the killings of black people. Since the police have been founded, they have been founded on the harassment of black people, the brutalization of black people, the killing of black people. A dog's life has more value than a black man's life. People were more concerned about the life of a damn gorilla at a zoo than they are concerned about the life of Alton Sterling and of Philando Castile. They're more concerned about a gorilla named Harambe than they are concerned about those two black men. When that gorilla was killed, you had these people protesting. They had signs up demanding justice for a damn gorilla. Those liberals, those white folks, demanding justice for a damn gorilla, but you don't see those people around when black people are killed. You don't see the same level of outrage when a black man is killed. You don't see that level of outrage. And I remember a couple of years ago, a lion was killed on a reserve in Africa. And there was all this uproar and crying, and people were upset. But people don't have that kind of anger when black people are killed. So yeah, Black Lives Matter is necessary. You know, the saying Black Lives Matter is necessary in a world where black lives are taken for granted, where black lives are discarded and viewed as dispensable and disposable. Our lives are disposable like babies' diapers as far as this society is concerned. They couldn't care less. Otherwise, how could you explain somebody like Eric Garner being killed live on camera, choked to death, and no charges being brought against that officer? How could you explain all these shootings and killings of black people if Black Lives Matter? All these situations where black people are killed and there is no justice. Like in the Freddie Gray case here in Maryland, in Baltimore, where 2 police officers were found not guilty and one faced a hung jury. So as long as there's injustice like this, as long as black lives are trampled over, as long as we are treated like the menace to society, like we are some kind of pest to this society, like rats or roaches, as long as that exists, there will always be a need for us to talk about how Black Lives Matter. It is not racist to say Black Lives Matter. It is racist that we even have to say it. The racist society makes it necessary for us to even have to say that word or those words, Black Lives Matter. So I wanted to deal with that. Also, I want to deal with this question of black on black violence. You know, whenever black people stand up and demand justice in the face of police brutality, these conservatives and their Negro stooges want to change the conversation into a conversation about black on black violence, when the two issues are entirely separate issues. The police, in theory, are supposed to protect and serve the community. They are the ones that are supposed to deal with violence in the community. They are the ones that are supposed to protect the people from criminals. Instead, too often the police are the criminals. Too often the police are the ones who are terrorizing people. Too often the police are the ones killing our people. And a disproportionate percentage of those people that are being killed, targeted, and harassed by the police are African American. And that's a problem that can and must be addressed. We refuse to allow anybody to derail the conversation, to have us go off onto a tangent. We need to focus on these police because it's their responsibility to serve the people. They are public servants. But instead of acting like public servants, they act like public menaces in our communities too often. And what separates them from other criminals is that these people operate under the color of the law. They have a badge that gives them the power to harass people. It gives them the power to kill people with impunity. They are given the benefit of the doubt. Their word is viewed as credible. The system is designed to protect these cops at every step and at every level, whether you're talking about the state level or the federal level. And that's why so few of them are prosecuted, especially when the victim is black. So as long as that reality exists where black people are brutalized by these police, harassed by these police, killed by these police, there will be a need to focus on police brutality. Now, there are organizations that do a wide range of things. There are organizations that fight to stop the violence in our communities. Black Lives Matter is a loose coalition of a wide range of groups that are fighting to end police brutality. That's their focus. Much like how you have doctors who have an area, a practice area. Like you may have a doctor that specializes in eyes, or a doctor that specializes in the heart, or a doctor that specializes in the nervous system and things like that. A brain surgeon. Those doctors have their areas of expertise, their areas of focus. And the same is true for a group like Black Lives Matter. Their focus is police brutality. Again, you have the example of an attorney. An attorney may have a certain practice area. He may focus on family law. He may focus on civil rights. He may focus on tax and business. He may have different areas of focus. Just because he's an attorney doesn't mean that he has to practice every area of the law or focus on every single aspect of the law. And the same is true with Black Lives Matter. Their focus is police brutality, and that focus is just, that focus is necessary. Because unlike a situation where you have black on black violence, when a black man kills somebody in the hood or whatever, and the police have evidence that he committed that crime, that black man will go to jail. That black man will receive a harsh punishment. Whereas when the police kill black people, these police just walk. That's part of the reason why there's a focus on this police brutality piece. And there is a focus on inner city violence as well. There are groups all over this country that are organizing to stop the violence. Whether you're here in Baltimore with the 300-man march, and other groups like Ceasefire or Safe Streets or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of the group. But there are other groups all over the country that are fighting to stop the violence. There are mentor programs in black communities. There are marches against the violence all over this nation. So that, the idea that black people don't care about inner city violence is just a falsehood. It's a false narrative that is being presented, not out of genuine concern about the violence that plagues our communities, but it's being thrown up as a red herring in order to deflect, in order to take the conversation off track when it comes to police brutality. So black people do care about these issues of inner city violence. If they didn't, you wouldn't hear black people speaking out against it. You wouldn't see people marching and holding vigils in neighborhoods around this country regularly to address the problem. You wouldn't have groups like the interrupters or interveners in Chicago trying to stop the violence. You wouldn't have mayors like Ras Baraka gathering these different warring factions to try to bring about peace. You wouldn't have that if people didn't care about inner city violence. The people care about it. The people are trying to do what they can to address that problem. But the question is, what is the larger society doing to address the problem? What are they doing to stop the violence? You have a mayor down there in Chicago who is a failed mayor. You know, if you want to talk about the problem of violence in Chicago, you need to talk about the failure of the mayor in Chicago, about the failure of the police department in Chicago. Also, you need to deal with the larger social economic issues that generate the crime that we see in the communities. Most of these people that are engaged in this cycle of violence are people in poor communities. And it's not a coincidence. When people are deprived of opportunity to get an education, to pursue a legitimate way of earning a living, they often get caught up into the drug trade. They often get caught up into the gangster lifestyle, and that perpetuates the destruction of our communities. So as long as you don't address the failed schools, as long as you don't address the lack of jobs, and as long as you don't wage a real war on poverty, you will continue to see problems like so-called black on black violence. As long as you look at that problem as just a black problem, and that's what America's done. They've just looked at it as a black problem and they've ignored it. And that's why it continues to fester. Because they couldn't care less about black people. They couldn't care less about our lives. The only time they talk about the violence that we experience in our neighborhoods is as a talking point to deflect away from police brutality. Because if they really cared about the violence, they would do more to fight poverty. They would do more to build schools. They would do more to bring jobs to these urban areas. But they haven't because they don't really care. Now, Giuliani said that he would, if he was a black father and he had black kids, he would teach his children to be respectful of the police. As if black people don't teach their children to be respectful of the police. Most of us have been taught how to interact with the police because we know, our parents know, our grandparents know about the history of the police. They know how the police get down when it comes to black people. They know about police shooting black men in the back for running from the police. Before the Walter Scott situation became public news, there had been many other Walter Scotts that didn't receive news coverage, that weren't captured on video. So our parents and our grandparents learned from those lessons, and they taught their children how to interact with these police. They taught them how to conduct themselves to avoid being brutalized by these police. But despite that, the violence against black people continued. So, this notion that he would teach his kids how to be respectful, that just is a slap in the face to black people. That's another example of paternalism and arrogance and racism, frankly. As if black people don't teach their children how to interact with police. That's part of what it means to survive as a black person in this country. And that's part of the mandatory lessons that most parents teach their children about how to not to be disrespectful to police, not to argue with police, not to fight with police, not to run from police. But despite all that, as I said before, you still have examples of black people getting killed by these police. He said something about how black people need to teach their kids to be careful of other black kids in the neighborhood. I mean, in many neighborhoods, parents teach their kids which groups of people to associate with and which groups not to associate with. And when you look at this so-called violence, I was reading a while ago, a few months ago, not too long ago, an article that basically said that, this issue of inner city violence is not just, it's not a problem that's across the board in the black community. It's concentrated in certain segments of the community, in certain clusters, and certain groups within the community. And many people, African Americans, teach their children not to associate with certain types of people and all that kind of stuff to avoid problems in life. But this problem of inner city violence is, pervasive. It is a serious problem. Um, and no matter how you educate your kid, you can still get shot in crossfire, shot accidentally, shot by being in the wrong area at the wrong time. And there are countless examples of that. So that problem of inner city violence needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed by the larger society. It needs to be addressed by the community. And it needs to be addressed by the elected officials. So, I just wanted to share these thoughts about this situation. I just find it ridiculous that this man, Giuliani, would talk about how basically the police brutality is not that big of a deal. It's rare and all this and that. When this man presided over a city where you had a police department commit all kinds of despicable atrocities against black people, like the Abner Louima case that he cited, and there are plenty of other examples of police out of hand. And from what I understand, there was something that happened in New York not too long ago where you had a police officer engage in a road rage incident. He lied about what happened, and the truth was captured on video, proving that the officer was aggressive, proving that the officer basically murdered somebody. And, I plan to do a video about that soon. I may do that tomorrow. But I just wanted to share these thoughts with you all. So tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.